Today I woke up and decided I hate myself, so to remedy this problem and escape this cruel fate, I'm gonna eat some biscuits from Popeyes, no water. Well, alright, out of fear of missing the next Steven Seagal movie, I don't think I could go through with it, and besides, there's actually things much worse than death if we're talking about ways to torture myself, like pinball, for example. Okay, so before I get the hardcore pinball fans riled up, I'm not saying that I have anything against pinball in general. It could be a pretty fun way to kill time at a bar or the gyno firm. In fact, I've been to a few pinball parlors around the world, and I can always appreciate seeing some fun adaptations of TV shows, movies, and even other video games. Hell, I'll even go one step further and admit that they could actually be pretty fun to play at home when you may or may not be on house arrest. What's always made me lose my mind, though, are pinball games that go beyond just having to go for your best score and then moving on with your life. Basically, any pinball game that came with levels and stories, most often found in spin-offs of franchise that had nothing to do with pinball in the first place. To this day, scientists are still trying to figure out what led to so many of these spin-offs, but while I may not be the most qualified person to solve this mystery myself, I do have a degree in thugonomics, so I might as well take a stab at it. See, as far as I'm concerned, only one of two things could have possibly led to the birth of so many pinball spin-offs. One's that companies with successful franchises simply wanted to make more money and decided to pump more games out as quickly as possible, but since mainline titles take way longer to make, they resorted to cranking a few spin-offs out since they're quicker and easier, and pinball just happened to be the genre of choice every now and then. Or what I think is a little more likely is that someone who works for gaming companies, probably Todd, really wanted to make a pinball game, but the problem is that pinball games could really only sell so many copies without a mascot involved, as we've seen with titles like Devil's Crush or Galactic Pinball. What's Devil's Crush or Galactic Pinball, you ask, non-pinball fans? Exactly. So in order to let Todd live out his pinball dreams, these video game companies decided to give him the old college try just as long as he'd incorporate his ideas with popular IPs in mind, preferably with franchises and characters that had some sort of ball-like mechanics. Case in point, Kirby's Pinball Land on the Game Boy. I mean, Kirby's round, so that passes for a ball, right?
Well, not really.
Damn it, Todd, you're fired! We're taking your name out of the credits. Budget cuts, pal. This game drove me absolutely insane as a kid, but now that I'm a full-grown man with way more life experience, I think I just might be able to enjoy it this time around.
A few moments later.
Okay, so I still can't stand the game 3 dogs' ages later, but it's not like it's poorly made or anything like that. In fact, there's actually a lot of really good things going on here. The story's a little odd in that Kirby's just walking around one day until King Dedede falls on him and creates pinball bumpers to escape, which forces Kirby to become a ball himself just to whoop his ass. Probably took me longer to explain the story than it did for HAL Laboratories to think it up, but I mean, it's friggin' pinball. What else could the story have been, you know? I do like that you can choose one of 3 stages. The level design and music are just dandy, and the gameplay is pretty fun for a couple of minutes, but once you get past the curiosity phase and actually set your mind to completing the game, you're gonna get so mad you'll want to get a vasectomy. Hello, Dr. Taraskevich? It's me, Cameron. Yeah, I'm playing Kirby's Pinball Land again. Usually the first thing that comes to anybody's mind when they think of Kirby is how easy the gameplay is. Usually a good way to just shut your brain off for a little while and have some fun. But Kirby's Pinball Land, of all things, is by far the hardest Kirby game ever made. And look, I'll be the first to admit that I suck horse at pinball, but I don't mind difficulty if the idea is to just get the highest score you possibly can and compare it with your friends. But when the goal is to beat all the stages and finish the story mode, then the game's gotta give you a little bit of wiggle room. I mean, I beat Ninja Gaiden the first time I ever tried playing it. I could beat most Mega Man games when I'm having trouble going to sleep, and not to brag or anything, but I do hold the world record for fastest speedrun to my Stop Smoking coach on Nintendo DS. I just did it again. So, you know, I wouldn't exactly say that I suck at video games, but I swear, Kirby's Pinball Land provides a special kind of frustration because it feels like so much of what happens is out of your control. See, in most video games, dying's usually your fault. There may be some glitches here and there, but for the most part, you are in control of what the character on the screen's doing. However, in Kirby's Pinball Land, all you can really do is shoot Kirby in a general direction and then just kind of hope for the best. Not saying it's pure luck, since there are speedrunners for this game, not to mention professional pinball players, but there's no way around the fact that luck certainly is a part of the equation here. Given how slow the game moves, it can be pretty painful to watch Kirby slip perfectly in the gap between the bumpers. You do have a chance to save yourself by having Kirby jump back up into action if you can press a button at the right time, but no matter how much I practice this, I have no idea when the game wants me to press the damn button, and even if you do master this part of the game, the rest is still pretty excruciating. It's like, why do you now suddenly forget how to float, you butthole? Each stage has multiple layers, and the idea is to work your way up to the top and beat a boss, but every time you think you're about to make any progress, you usually make one mistake and fall all the way down and have to work your way back up all over again. This wouldn't be that big of a deal if you could just pick up where you left off once you finally made it back to the upper areas again, but if you fall to a lower floor, then you lose all your progress you might have had, making you feel like everything you did was a complete waste of time. It's Since the game only gives you 3 lives, I can't imagine how gut-wrenching it must be to make it past the first 2 stages, only to get a game over on the 3rd and have to start all the way over from the beginning of the game and hope for the best when you refling Kirby all over again. No joke, this game almost made me completely give up on playing any more Pinball Spinoffs. I actually almost gave up on this video entirely, but thankfully I managed to salvage any remaining sanity I had left when I found out that just about everyone else who played this game had an aneurysm or 2 in their asses. Again though, everything about this game aside from the difficulty is actually really cool, and I'd have probably loved it if it would just chill the frig out, so I'm gonna have to give it a 2 out of 5, but at the risk of getting a hit put out on me, I'd have probably give it a 3 if the game would just give you continues or more lives. You might think that there'd only have been room for 1 pinball spin-off for the 1993 holiday season though, but what do you get when you take Sega's love for milk and Sonic the Hedgehog and combine it with the fact that Sonic can turn into a ball? Sonic's Pinball? No, dumbass, you get Sonic Spinball for the Sega Genesis. I've heard it both ways. Coming out just 2 weeks before Kirby's Pinball Land, Sonic Spinball is one of those games that I think most people rented once as a kid, thought it was weird, gave up after 5 minutes without ever making it past the first level, only to never play it again. Unlike all the other mascots that went down the same path though, Sonic probably had the best reason to adopt pinball as a side hustle, given that the Casino Night Zone was the most popular stage in the ultra-famous Sonic the Hedgehog 2. This is the first pinball spin-off I ever saw in my life, but I personally thought it was pretty weird, because I mean, yeah, the Casino Night Zone was fun and creative in Sonic 2 for like 5 minutes, but I didn't think it needed to be an entire game. Regardless of whether or not you've actually gotten around to this one though, Sonic Spinball is one of those titles that everyone who knows what video games are at least aware that it exists, and after finally giving this a fair shake decades after the fact, I've gotta say that it's much better than I remembered. Unlike one certain game, Sonic's not a ball for 100% of the playthrough. He actually starts off using his own 2 feet before jumping into these wacky pinball contraptions, and you know what? I actually like that, because why would he suddenly forget how to stand up, you know? I mean, the controls are nothing like the mainline Sonic games on the Genesis, and really they're pretty atrocious here. It feels like Sonic couldn't even pass the sobriety test if his life depended on it. I guess Sonic's abysmal walking skills make sense considering the fact that he's being tossed around more than my salad was that time I had to spend the night in jail, but speaking of sobriety though, what the frig was Robotnik drinking when he hatched this scheme up? I mean, come on, did he really have to build, quote, pinball machine-like systems? I can't be too critical of the gameplay or story though, since this actually takes place in the universe of the animated series, and I can totally see that version of Robotnik pulling something like this. Jesus! As far as video games that are based off of TV and movies or based off of video games go, I'd say that Sonic Spinball is the greatest of all time. Sorry, Street Fighter the movie, the game. Hell, even for pinball, this is just plain fun. Rather than just flinging Sonic into a general direction and hoping the pinball gods guide you back to the bumpers, you can also control him while he's in the air, and I friggin' love this, because it completely eliminates that helpless feeling of watching your ball fly into the danger zone after ricocheting off of like 87 things. And even if you do botch it, Sonic has one last chance to jump out of harm's way thanks to this revolutionary pinball feature known as standing up. There are a few spots in each stage where you don't get this chance, but even so, dying in Sonic Spinball is still completely on you since you have so much control over Sonic's physics. Now, you might argue that controlling your ball in the air and being able to jump out of harm's way makes this less of a pinball game, and of course it does. That's why I like it so much, especially after playing Kirby's Pinball Land. And unlike Kirby's Pinball Land, jumping here actually works. Not only is this game control great though, but it's also got bonus stages that are also pinball games in case you wanted more pinball with your pinball. However, not everything about Sonic Spinball is great though. The sound's actually pretty atrocious, even by Genesis standards. I know this is gonna sound like a really weird complaint that only IGN could come up with, but I kinda think it sounds too much like a video game, almost as if you explained what video games sounded like to an AI and asked it to make some sound effects of its own. Ultimately, the sound's not really that big of a deal, but sometimes I have no idea what the frig I'm supposed to do, and I find myself just hitting the ball around like a goon before realizing that I'm not making any progress. And I don't have my reading glasses, but does this really say what I think it does? What are coming? I'm not trying to spruce somebody else's wife, I'm just trying to play pinball, and why not just call them robots? What do their fetishes have to do with this game? Sega also made another version of Sonic Spinball for the Master System and Game Gear that's actually its own separate game made from the ground up, rather than just being copy and pasted with downgraded visuals, much like the other 8-bit Sonic the Hedgehog games. This version has a little less imagination, but it does sound way better and is still pretty solid for what it's worth, plus the Game Gear version's portable, which is something you just can't get from the Genesis version. Either way though, I think I'll go with a 5 out of 5 for both the Genesis and Master System versions, but just keep in mind that this score is only for pinball games. There'd be quite a few franchises in the coming years that were popular enough to warrant spin-offs, but none with any notable balls or ball-like structures within their universes. However, just when it seemed like the greatest ball-related spin-off we'd get was Mega Man Soccer, a little franchise named Pokemon came along and gifted the world with Pokemon Pinball. In case you're a total spaz, Pokemon was lighting the world on fire in the late 90s, so any game that even sounded similar was gonna sell out the ass, and Pinball was no exception. The game comes with 2 tables, one for red and one for blue based on the 2 versions of the first Pokemon generation, and each had their own playable locations within the stages that determine which Pokemon you get to capture. The whole idea is to activate the Get lights 2 to 3 times for different Pokemon, and then capture whatever appears within a 2-minute window, which is usually more than enough time to get the job done. There's not really a story or anything like that, but if the game's just gonna be a pure pinball experience like this, then I'd much prefer it that way, because then I don't have to stress about completing anything. I mean, if you want, you could fill the entire Pokédex up, but it's really only optional, and you're not expected to do it all in one go. There are bosses and stuff, and after you catch 3 Pokemon, you gotta relocate to another area to catch different kinds of Pokemon, but at its core, it's pretty much just a high-score pinball game, with the Pokédex serving as motivation to keep you playing after one go more than anything else. You might not have any control over your ball once you hit it, but the game's still pretty lenient with do-overs. Sometimes it even bails you out when you're clearly going to hell. Whenever this happens, it kind of feels like unfair glitches are working in your favor, but even if you get a game over, you're never gonna feel the need to shout expletives until you get a citation for disturbing the peace, because it's not like the Pokédex ever resets and makes you start all the way over from the beginning. I mean, in Pokemon Pinball, you just don't get that same powerless feeling when your ball spirals out of control and goes right in the gutter, because it's not even hard to catch Pokemon anyway, so the entire experience is just plain nice and relaxing whenever you get around to playing it. Even if you don't know anything about Pokemon and just want to play some pinball, it's still a lot of fun, but if you're a fan of the original games, then there's a whole lot to love here. I mean, sure, maybe a spin-off, but it's still one that's got a lot of love put into it. Plus, there's also tons of original music here that they'd actually go on to remake for later games in the series. I mean, my god, this game even has an 8-bit version of the opening theme from the Japanese anime, and it sounds pretty good, too. The copy I've got happens to be in Japanese, but with the exception of the Pokédex entries, the game is almost entirely in English, outside of the names of the Pokemon anyway, but even then they're still displayed with English characters. Some Pokemon have the same names in every language, but most of them are self-explanatory even if you don't understand it. Wait, you've got a crab? Ugh, this game sounds just like my doctor. Pokemon Pinball may be insanely simplistic, but that's also why it's so great, and as if that wasn't good enough, the developers even went the extra mile and added a rumble feature that takes a literal AAA battery. And let me tell ya, the vibration on this thing's loud, powerful, and, well, for some reason my stepdad Lonnie always wants to borrow it, so I had to play the majority of this game without this feature, but I think I got the gist of it. The rumble may be completely unnecessary, but that's kind of the whole draw to the game. An incredibly simplistic and basic pinball game loaded with way more extra content and features you could ever ask for. Maybe I'm being too generous, but I think I'm gonna go with another 5 out of 5 for this one. Pretty crazy considering this game runs on the same engine as Kirby's Pinball Land, which I hated so much that I reviewed it before Sonic Spinball, despite the fact that it actually came out first so I can get it out of the way. Seeing some Pokemon Pinball seemed to rub everybody the right way though, they did eventually make another one for the Ruby and Sapphire games on the Game Boy Advance. Truth be told, I don't exactly, well, what you'd call own this game because of those pesky child support payments I have to make my ex-wife Chili every month. Women, am I right? So in order to give this game a whirl, I'm gonna have to download certain computer software that my parole officer highly advised against me possessing. And look, normally I wouldn't use emulators to make a video, but I mean, I kinda already used one for the Master System version of Sonic Spinball and nobody seemed to notice, so what's one more parole violation, am I right? I mean, it's not like there's any official way to support Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire at this point anyway, so it's a victimless crime if you really think. Okay, fine, they're selling it on the Wii U's eShop, but I already played it before I started working on this video, and besides, what's Nintendo gonna do, sue me over some ROMs and emulators? Wait, no, I'm joking. I have the game right here. I just, I can't afford to zoom in or show you the front of the cartridge. There. Nothing but an officially licensed Game Boy Advance cartridge that's perfectly legal to own, so I can't get in any trouble whatsoever. You must! Whoa, what are you talking about? We just wanted to toss you a literal salad with romaine lettuce because we like preparing food so much. If we were talking about that other disgusting thing you're thinking of, then YouTube wouldn't let you make your $4 off this video. I know.
10 years later.
Anyway, the first thing to note here is that this is a pretty substantial visual upgrade from the Game Boy predecessor, and the intro's pretty cool too. It's pretty much the same game as before, but they did add a few things like shops you could buy upgrades and perks at, and you could also hatch eggs to expedite the process of filling your Pokédex out too, so that's pretty cool. Plus, unlike the previous game, you can catch evolved Pokemon in the wild instead of always having to resort to evolution, so this is one Pokemon game that hardcore Christians can finally let loose and get nuts with. Sadly though, those are really the only upgrades the game had going for it, and honestly, I'd say that the first game actually did a lot of things better. Like, the music's perfectly fine, and it's actually quite relaxing, but I mean, all the songs are just copy and pasted over from Ruby and Sapphire, whereas the first one had all original tracks. But to me, the most disappointing thing about this game by far is the fact that you can't even catch all the Pokemon that existed at the time this came out.
What's up with that?
And the game does include the full Pokédex that was used in the Hoenn region before you upgraded to the National Dex, which is technically the same thing the original Pokemon Pinball did since there wasn't really a National Dex back then, so, you know, the sequel does in fact have more Pokemon. But this is the friggin' Game Boy Advance we're talking about. There's no reason why they couldn't have just given us everything. Man, the first game felt like they really went the extra mile to make sure it wasn't just some cheap and lazy cash grab that's just milking the Pokemon game, whereas Pokemon Pinball Advance kinda fails to live up to that standard a little bit. It's still a good game overall, but it definitely doesn't feel as special, even without the nostalgia involved, so I think I'm gonna have to go with a 3 out of 5 for this one. But good old Pokemon wasn't the only franchise with a sequel to their pinball spin-off on the Game Boy Advance though, because Sonic the Hedgehog managed to do the exact same thing with Sonic Pinball Party. And well, I've gotta say that things are already off to a bad start when the game opens up with bland text on a black background, and to make matters worse, the story's not exactly what I'd call riveting either. Peace returned after Sonic foiled Eggman's latest plan, but Eggman is about to disrupt peace again. Dr. Eggman has kidnapped the innocent animals visiting Casino Atlus so he can transform them into his robotic slaves. Like, come on, they really couldn't have given us a background? It's like, yeah, you're Sonic, Eggman or whatever, enslave some animals, go save them. But what about the, eat me, I'm on break. And since when is Sonic known as the hero of justice? Did the guy who wrote this line lie on his resume or something? I said I'm on break. If the story's gonna be this straightforward, then why don't they just use like 2 or 3 images to get the same point across? Even I could have made these so-called cutscenes with bland text on a black background. And that's coming from a guy who doesn't even know how to safely make a stage in Mario Maker. So anyway, as the bland text on a black background established, the whole idea is that you're trying to win some pinball tournament to free enslaved and robofied animals, but for some reason, Knuckles feels like it's more important to prove that he's more of a pinball wizard than Sonic, even if it means letting the animals suffer. I mean, he even flat out said he's playing for pride. What a dick. To be fair, I don't know how innocent these animals really are, despite the fact that the game proclaims it without anybody ever running any background checks or anything like that, but I'm pretty sure they don't deserve to be turned into robots, so what gives, Knuckles? I mean, yeah, Tails opposes Sonic in the very next round, but at least he's under some sort of mind control or something, but Knuckles is clearly doing this of his own free will. Oh well, it's still a better portrayal of Knuckles than Sonic Boom, I suppose. As far as the actual gameplay itself is concerned though, it's completely fine for a pinball game, I guess, but more so than any other spin-off in this video, it sort of feels like Sonic was just shoehorned in at the last second after Sega realized that nobody on Earth was gonna buy a game called Pinball Advance. In Sonic Spinball, you were actually playing as Sonic himself because you could do the whole ball gimmick, but here you're just controlling Sonic playing a regular old pinball machine, which is almost as bad as the cutscenes with bland text on a black background. I mean, the game even lets you play as Tails and nothing changes at all, so at that point, I might as well just imagine I'm playing as Marco Stun. Some of the music's just recycled from Sonic Advance, but they did manage to remake some classic tunes like Supersonic Racing, so I will give the sound a pass, and it's also pretty cool that they have tables for Samba de Amigo and Nights into Dreams, but since they're just as generic as the Sonic table, I'm pretty convinced that they didn't have Sonic in mind at all when they started making this game. You might think that's a knock, but it's actually me just trying to find an excuse as to why this is such a lackluster Sonic pinball game. But I mean, if they did have Sonic in mind from the beginning of the development, then that most definitely was an insult. If you're looking for plain old pinball on the Game Boy Advance, then Sonic Pinball Party's completely fine, but even then, it's still nothing special, and Sonic's inclusion just feels forced, even if it is still better than if it were just a generic pinball game, so I'm gonna have to go with a 2 out of 5 here, but I might have went a little bit higher if the game didn't friggin' boo me for dying. After seeing so many of his fellow video game mascots trying their hand at this whole pinball craze though, the biggest mascot in all of video gaming decided that he too would try his hand at it regardless of his lack of balls, because by God, where there's a will, there's a way when it comes to Mario, which brings us to Mario Pinball Land. The game starts off with, you guessed it, Peach being kidnapped by Bowser, but instead of bland text and a plain black background, they actually told the story with like 3 pictures, because unlike Sonic Pinball Party, this pinball game was most likely built from the ground up with a mascot in mind. The story's a little bit weird here though. It starts with Peach deciding to crush her entire body with the intention of shooting herself into a target, because apparently the gang was trying to impress a local cult leader or something. But before they can fire Peach into her doom, Bowser turns the cannon and shoots her towards his castle, and as always, it's up to Mario to save the day, but apparently he thought doing so with limbs wasn't enough of a challenge this time, so he too decided to crush his body before going after her, most likely shrinking his Winky in the process. What? I mean, I know we need a pinball game here, but wouldn't it have made more sense for him to have already been crushed before Peach got kidnapped? Whatever his goofy-ass reasoning may be, though, Mario Pinball Land's got a hell of a lot of charm, but once that wears off, the game doesn't really have much else to offer. Rather than a Mario-themed pinball game, this is much more of a pinball game that's trying to be Mario 64, which would be a ton of fun if it weren't for the fact that it's pinball. The goal is to find a bunch of keys hidden throughout the world to get inside of Bowser's castle so you could ultimately, well, whoop his hamburger candy ass, of course. There's also tons of stars you need to collect by completing certain challenges that you need to get through certain doors, and there's also tons of exploration and secrets and all that, but at the end of the day, you only have so much control over Mario, which makes this game incredibly friggin' frustrating. Granted, it's nowhere near as rage-inducing as the Pinball Land Kirby tried pawning off on us, but it's still not fun to control Mario here nonetheless. For a game where it's more important to get the ending than a high score as opposed to the old Pokemon pinball approach, not having any influence over where the ball goes outside of just hitting it and hoping for the best is just not something I'm mentally prepared to handle right now. Again, there is skill to pinball, but when you're not a pro, it just feels like you're hitting the ball and hoping for the best. In some ways, it's not quite as frustrating as Kirby, because the game does give you more wiggle room with power-ups and even as a blocker for a few seconds every time you enter a new area. But in a lot of other ways, Mario's pinball is actually way more frustrating than Kirby's just because of how much longer the game is, especially if you're trying to beat it, let alone 100% it. I mean, the game's friggin' huge for pinball, and moving from one area to another could take minutes if you don't know what you're doing, which of course I don't. Hitting balls into doors is the only way to open them, but if you want to actually proceed to the area, you've got to hit your ball in the same spot again, and if you accidentally bump into the other doors, and they all shut at once and you got to do it all over again. Why this game's got to be such a wiener about it, I have no idea, but that's how it works here. Like, it's not that hard to hit certain spots, but when enemies are constantly getting in the way, it makes you want to grow a mustache just so you can rip it off. Okay, so my fake mustaches haven't come in from eBay yet, so... Haha, no gag for you. And I know you're probably thinking, hey nerd, why don't you just clear the enemies out before aiming at the doors? And well, if you kill all the enemies, then they're just gonna respawn, so much like Kirby, you're kinda just hoping for the best when you launch Mario. Thankfully, the calming music maintained my sanity, and the game is visually nice to look at, but so many of the challenges either feel exactly the same, or they're just really cryptic. The bosses are kinda cool, I guess, but as expected, any damage you do is undone if you fall off the table, so... I just don't feel like it. Still better than Kirby, but not something I'd ever want to play again. 2 out of 5. Before Nintendo would give the whole pinball thing a rest, though, they decided to try it out one more time after another one of their ball-related franchises finally got popular enough to warrant a spin-off, hence Metroid Prime Pinball. Story-wise, it's basically a retelling of the first Metroid Prime game, which I suppose could qualify this as a remake, which sounds ridiculous, but they really did bend over backwards to try to make Pinball, of all things, feel like a Metroid Prime game, and somehow they actually did a pretty good job of it, if I'm being honest. Rather than enemies automatically exploding if you touch them, they can actually grab a hold of you if you don't hit them hard enough, and even if they don't throw you in between the bumper gap, they can still kill you by draining your life. Since this is a Metroid game, you can fight back in other ways by gaining upgrades like power bombs and missiles and all that good stuff, which makes this feel like a pinball game that they actually wanted to make as opposed to some random spin-off meant to make a quick buck. Unlike most other pinball games with stories, though, Metroid Prime at least has the decency to space the game out with 6 separate stages and a save feature, as opposed to everything just being connected into one world. That way you get a lot of content without having to worry about losing too much progress should you make a few mistakes here and there. All 6 of the tables look great, and I was honestly a little bit surprised with just how good the music is. Plus, there's also tons of bonus games, plenty of bosses, and even multiplayer if you happen to know another person who owns the game and wants to play it with you. If I'm ever a multi-billionaire, these are the kinds of games I'm gonna hold tournaments for, cause otherwise I don't think anybody's ever gonna play these multiplayer modes again. Even though I think the challenge is fair though, the game's still pretty friggin' hard, cause you'll still only be able to control so much of what happens, and I know Nintendo probably thought this little blind spot in between the DS's screens was cute, but it's actually pretty friggin' annoying here. All in all though, this is still a much better pinball game than it had any right to be, so I think I'm gonna go with a 4 out of 5 here. And then lastly, we've got Bethesda Pinball, but rather than being a unique spin on pinball, it's pretty much just a simulation of a real pinball table with a few twists that would only work in a video game. These twists can range from things like enemies attacking you, create a character mode, modest RPG leveling elements, and some animations here and there that are pretty cool actually. There's 3 separate tables from Fallout, Skyrim, and Doom respectively that are all mostly filled with a ton of detailed fan service, and you know what? They all look great. Aside from a few challenges here and there though, this is ultimately just textbook pinball, but I can't really fault it for that because it's exactly what they're going for, so you don't feel like you're getting gypped or anything like that. There may not be any fun stories or crazy game modes or anything like that, but there's also no stress or frustration if you fail either. Just a chill pinball game that's great to play in short bursts and go for high scores and all that, but nothing that you'd ever want to put in your backlog or anything like that. There may not be a whole lot of meat on the bone here, but the game accomplishes exactly what it's going for, so I think I'm gonna do a 4 out of 5. Well, I've got to say that after playing all these Pinball Spinoffs, I'm not nearly as miserable as I thought I'd be. Now, they didn't exactly turn my life around either, so I'm kind of stuck in this weird middle ground where I still want to punish myself, but not quite enough to where I want to end it all, and even if I did, I don't think I could afford any more Popeye's biscuits after I spend the last of my money on that pesky child support and mustaches that still haven't even come in the mail, so I guess I'll have to settle between living and suicide by watching that new Seagal movie that just came out.
Keep on pushing for life. A lot of dim sums hate on me because of my Steven Seagal look. Steven Seagal look. I'm just Hollywood and stuff like that, you know, so it is what it is and stuff like that, you know.
Still not the worst Steven Seagal movie I ever saw.